My name is Rachel Dunbar. I have been a law enforcement officer with the United States Forest Service for 12 years, and for the last 8 of those years I have been assigned to the Pope and Hardin County District of Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois. I grew up in El Dorado, Saline County, about 30 miles north of where my district begins, and finished a natural resources management degree at Southern Illinois University Carbondale in 2007. 3 years of seasonal work on fire crews and trail crews followed, then a permanent appointment, then 2 more years before I earned the 1,811 law enforcement designation. I carry a badge, a service sidearm, and a citation book. My job is to protect the land and the people on it. I am telling you this at the outset because what I am going to describe has been questioned before, and I want you to know who is telling it. I have 12 years of professional training in evidence collection, resource assessment, and field documentation. I do not reach for unusual explanations before I have exhausted the ordinary ones. I document what I observe, and I write accurate reports. Everything I am about to share is documented on government hardware, in written field logs, and in the district maintenance record for a facility that falls within my official area of responsibility. I have not added to it. I have not speculated beyond what the evidence shows, and I have not yet found a satisfactory explanation for all of it. The Pope and Hardin County District covers roughly 200,000 acres in the extreme southern tip of Illinois, where the state narrows to a point between the Mississippi River on the west and the Ohio River on the east. Most people outside the region have never heard of Pope County. It is the least populated county in the entire state, approximately 4,100 residents across 374 square miles, and a very large portion of those square miles is Shawnee National Forest land. The county seat is Golconda, which sits on the Ohio River about 50 miles upstream from Paducah, Kentucky. My district office is in Harrisburg, which is technically Saline County rather than Pope County, but I spend the majority of my working days south of Harrisburg, driving forest roads through Pope and Hardin counties on patrol and inspection rotations. The terrain in the southern section of the district is nothing like what most people associate with Illinois. No flat prairie, no grain fields, no horizon line of water towers and elevator bins. The Illinois Ozarks, a dissected sandstone and shale plateau, run through southern Illinois and give the land a character much closer to the Ozarks of Missouri and Arkansas than to the agricultural flatlands of central Illinois. Sandstone bluffs rising 50 to 80 feet above creek drainages, ridgelines cutting between hollow bottoms full of oak, hickory, and tulip poplar, shortleaf and loblolly pine dents on the south-facing slopes. The Garden of the Gods wilderness, about 3,300 acres of sandstone rock formations near the Saline-Pope County line, draws several 100,000 visitors each year. Camel Rock, Table Rock, formations that photograph well, but the Garden of the Gods is not where I spend most of my time. Most of my time is on 2-track forest roads through dense, second-growth timber, where you can drive 45 minutes without encountering another vehicle, a marked trailhead, or a cell signal worth mentioning. That is the section where the Barker Creek shelter sits, and I need to explain that structure before I get into anything else, because nothing that follows makes sense without it. The Civilian Conservation Corps operated extensively throughout Shawnee National Forest, from the mid-1930s through the early 1940s. Large sections of this forest still run on infrastructure those CCC crews built, including trails, fire roads, recreation area shelters, drainage crossings, and several small patrol cabins that were used for fire watch rotations and overnight ranger presence in remote sections of the district. The Barker Creek Shelter, designated Shelter 14C in the district inventory, was one of those patrol cabins. According to a construction log I eventually pulled from the Regional Archive in Milwaukee, it was completed in the summer of 1938. For the walls, the crew quarried sandstone from a bluff face approximately a mile north of the building site. Those walls are 18 inches thick, laid in courses without mortar at the interior face, which gives the inside of the building the raw, fitted look consistent with CCC stonework throughout the region. At 22 feet east to west by 14 feet north to south, the footprint is modest. A single interior partition wall runs across the building about 11 feet from the west end, creating a front room and a back room of roughly equal size. The interior ceiling height is 6 feet and 2 inches. That measurement is in the 1938 construction notes, and I confirmed it myself with a tape measure during an inspection 2 years ago. The windows are 28 inches wide and 24 inches tall, set into the sandstone and hand-fitted wooden frames. There are 2 of them, one on the north wall of the front room and one on the east wall of the back room. The west wall has the entry, a solid plank door that was replaced with a steel security door in 1984 and fitted with a Forest Service padlock when the cabin was decommissioned in 1987. Both windows have been boarded with 3/4-inch plywood sheets screwed to the exterior stone with lag bolts since that decommissioning. The cabin was taken out of active use in 1987 because a maintenance assessment identified the roof seam and the east window frame as requiring repairs that exceeded the available budget. Rather than repair or demolish the structure, the decision was made to secure it and keep it in the inventory as a maintained, decommissioned facility. It is inspected twice monthly, logged in the district maintenance record, and theoretically available for emergency use if a ranger needed shelter in that part of the forest. I have been conducting those inspections for 8 years. I know the building the way you know a place you have visited 200 times in all seasons. I know that the east wall runs roughly 10 degrees off true east because of a survey adjustment the CCC crew made to accommodate the ground slope. I know that the front room floor has a slight concavity near the partition wall where the concrete settled over decades. I know that in sustained rain, the north wall bleeds a faint rust stain from the iron content in the sandstone. I know that the 2 metal folding chairs in the back room have been kept against the north wall since at least 2016, when I inventoried the interior formally for the first time. A service road to the cabin leaves Forest Road 847 on the south side. At the junction, there is a cable gate with a combination lock, combination known to authorized district personnel. Running 1.2 miles south and slightly east through mixed pine and hardwood, the road reaches the cabin clearing. Hard-packed gravel covers the first half-mile. 2-track dirt with a center grass strip makes up the second half. At the far end sits a small clearing of roughly 1/3 of an acre. South of the clearing, the ground drops toward Barker Creek, which runs through a bottom of sycamore and river birch, about 400 yards south, before joining a larger drainage in the Saline River watershed. The east tree line is dense shortleaf pine planted in rows by the CCC, orderly and close-spaced the way planted timber looks, rather than natural regeneration. I started running trail cameras at the Barker Creek site in June of 2 years ago. The reason had nothing to do with the cabin, and nothing to do with anything I would have called unusual. I was working a turkey poaching problem in the Barker Creek drainage. Someone had been running wire snares along the creek bottom on federal land for at least 2 full spring seasons. I was losing birds to the snares and not catching whoever was setting them. The forest borders private hunting land on 3 sides in that area, and the creek bottom timber is dense enough that someone can work snares and be gone before the next patrol covers that road. I placed a cut-back long-range IR at the service road junction, aimed back toward the FR 847 approach, to document anyone driving the service road at night. The cut-back runs a 940 nanometer black flash infrared array, invisible to the human eye and to wildlife at practical distances, with a 7.2 foot detection range and a 0.4 second trigger. A vehicle at the cable gate would not know the camera had fired. I also placed a Tacticam Reveal X Pro on the southeast corner of the cabin structure, angled to cover the east tree line and the creek bottom approach from the south. The Tacticam is a cellular camera that pushes notifications to an app on my government-issued phone within seconds of a trigger. Signal at that location is marginal but adequate. I positioned it to monitor the field edge and the planted pine rows to the east because that was where snare activity had been concentrated. I ran those 2 cameras from June through August. On the poaching case, the results were mixed. The cut-back caught a gray SUV at the service road junction on 3 separate nights in June, but I had the camera angle wrong and could not get a usable plate read. I corrected the angle in July, and by that point the vehicle had stopped coming. I found and pulled active snares in the creek bottom twice during the summer, but never caught anyone setting them. The case resolved through a plea agreement on an unrelated charge. Both cameras stayed up. The night of September 14th was the first time anything caught my attention, and I want to be precise about the sequence. because the sequence matters. I was on a late patrol. Late patrols are standard practice in early September because Illinois archery deer season opens September 1st, and the first 2 weeks reliably bring hunters pushing onto Forest Service land after dark from adjacent private parcels. I was running FR 847 westbound at approximately 11:38 at night. No light bar, standard headlights only. I was approaching the curve that opens a line of sight to the service road junction about 200 yards ahead. I came around the curve and I saw, through the pine canopy to the south of the road, a glow in the trees. No headlight beam, no flashlight sweep. The color was warm, orange-amber, visible through the timber at the approximate depth and direction where the Barker Creek shelter sits behind its service road. Dim and contained, not projecting outward. The glow that comes through cracks in a structure when there is a lamp inside, contained and leaking rather than radiating. I stopped the truck and killed the headlights. The glow was still there, steady through the pine rows. I considered headlight glare off the cable gate hardware, some unusual angle throwing it back through the trees, and ruled it out. My headlights had been pointing west. The glow was to the south. No geometry from my position accounted for it. I parked at the gate and walked in with my flashlight and radio. The service road was dry. I covered the 1.2 miles in about 19 minutes. At the clearing edge, I went to the west, face first, the door side, and saw nothing. Around to the north wall, nothing, and then to the east wall. The plywood board on the east window was fully in place. All 4 lag bolts visible in my flashlight beam. I pressed my hand flat against the board. Cold. I ran the light along the gap at the top right corner, a gap I knew existed from prior inspections, roughly 4 inches horizontal, and about 1.5 inches across at its widest, where weathering had pulled the board slightly away from the window frame. I looked through it, dark inside. I stood at the east wall for several minutes and listened. Creek noise to the south, wind in the shortleaf pine rows, a great horned owl somewhere east of the clearing. Then I went back to the truck and logged it as possible headlight reflection from Forest Road 1272 via the timber corridor. Investigated. Nothing found. Cleared at 0012. FR 1272 runs about 3/4 of a mile south through Hardin County, with a sweeping curve that can throw headlight glare through timber at angles that seem impossible on a map. I had seen that effect before. I believed the explanation when I wrote it. The following morning, I pulled the Tacticam app over breakfast. The camera had sent 3 notifications between 11:30 and midnight. I had received them during the patrol and not opened them, assuming deer on the tree line. The first image, timestamped at 11:34 at night, showed the east face of the cabin from the southeast corner position. The full east wall and frame, the concrete block foundation at the bottom, the sandstone coursework above it, the plywood board centered in the upper half of the frame covering the backroom window, the corrugated metal roof edge at the top, a raccoon in the lower right of the frame, about 15 feet from the camera, working the weedy clearing edge. The second image, timestamped at 11:38 at night, showed the same view. That raccoon was gone, east wall unchanged, but at the upper right corner of the plywood board, in the gap between the board edge and the window frame, there was light. Orange-amber, soft, consistent, coming from inside the cabin through the gap. This was not a camera flash artifact. The Tacticam uses 940 nanometer infrared flash for its night images, fully invisible to the human eye and producing grayscale IR illumination. The glow in this image was clearly in the visible light spectrum. Warm orange. The camera's flash did not produce it. Whatever produced it was inside the sealed, padlocked, decommissioned cabin. The third image, timestamped at 11:42 at night, showed the east wall normally. No glow. I finished my coffee looking at those 3 images. The plywood board was intact in all 3 frames. The glow appeared at 11:38 and was gone by 11:42. I had arrived at the east wall around midnight. The light had been absent for at least 20 minutes before I ever pressed my hand against that board. Whatever produced it had stopped before I got there. That afternoon I drove back and inspected the east window board more carefully than I ever had. The gap at the top right corner ran 4 inches along the horizontal edge and about 1.5 inches across at its widest, where seasonal moisture cycling had pulled the wood fractionally from the frame. It was not visible from normal standing distance without getting within 6 inches of the board and looking specifically. I pressed my face against it and looked through. Dark. Inside. Nothing. I opened the padlock and went inside. Front room undisturbed. The back room showed both metal chairs against the north wall where I had left them in August, the table against the west wall, fine silt on the concrete floor with my August boot prints, and no others. No burn marks. No wax, no candle residue, no ash, no evidence of any flame source. But there was a smell. The cabin typically smells of mildew and old wood, and whatever small mammal has been using the corners for cover. This time, something else was present underneath all of that. Something I can only describe as mineral. Wet stone. The air quality of a cave, that specific clean, damp, cold character that sandstone and limestone produce when they hold moisture in a sealed space. Not unpleasant, just very distinct and very present. I had been in that back room approximately 200 times in 8 years and had never noted that quality in the air. I made a note in my phone and attributed it to the rainfall 2 nights prior and the concrete floor retaining moisture without adequate ventilation, a reasonable attribution. That evening I went through the full Tacticam archive from June. I had not been reviewing those images carefully during the summer, focused on the approach road camera for the poaching case. I found 3 events I had missed. June 22nd, 1 image at 11:26 at night, the glow in the board gap. July 8th, 1 image at 11:41 at night, the same. August 30th, 2 images at 11:19 and 11:23 at night, both showing the glow. I had received notifications on my phone during each of those nights. I had assumed deer and had not opened them, 4 separate times across 3 months. After that, I began paying close attention. I moved the cut-a-back long-range IR from the service road junction to the northeast corner of the cabin clearing, repositioned to cover the full east wall at a 4-5 degree angle from the north. I also mounted a Primos Proof 03 on the south corner, aimed northwest along the east wall, to create cross coverage on that east window from a second angle. The Primos runs a standard 850 nanometer infrared array, and I positioned it specifically to overlap with the Tacticam field of view at the board gap, so any light event in that corner would appear on at least 2 independent sensors from 2 independent angles. Between the cross coverage and the Tacticam at the southeast corner, I now had 3 cameras covering the east face of the cabin from 3 separate positions. I also updated my patrol schedule to keep me on or near FR 847 between 10 p.m. and midnight on clear nights when other priorities allowed it. The pattern was not large enough for confident conclusions, but the time window was consistent, and the 3-camera setup would give me cleaner documentation of the next event. October produced 3 more events. The last one changed what I thought I was dealing with. October 3rd, the Tacticam and the repositioned cutaback both triggered at 11:22. I was not in the area and pulled the images the following morning. The cutaback image from the northeast angle was the cleanest documentation I had gotten. Positioned to eliminate any possibility of external light contamination from behind the camera or off the clearing edges, it confirmed the glow was coming from inside the cabin, through the board gap. Nothing outside the cabin could account for it. October 17th was a clean repeat. The glow appeared at 11:31 at night across 2 cameras and was absent by 11:39 at night. Another well-documented event with no new structural information. October 31st, I was on patrol on FR 847, parked on the south shoulder, about a mile west of the service road junction. I was watching a cutover field edge on a private parcel bordering the forest boundary, where a spotlighter's vehicle had been documented 2 weeks earlier. At 11:47 at night, the Tacticam sent a notification. I opened it. The glow was visible in the board gap. I was less than 10 minutes on foot from the junction. I drove to the gate, parked, and covered the 1.2 miles at a pace just short of running. The night was cold, low 40s, clear sky, no wind. Barker Creek was audible to the south before I reached the clearing. At approximately 11:59, I stopped at the clearing edge. The east wall was visible across 80 feet of open ground. That glow was there. Amber light at the top right of the plywood board. Steady and warm. I watched it for what I estimate was 3 minutes. No flicker. No variation in intensity. A flame source of any type would show movement under field conditions. Oil lamps respond to air pressure. Candles shift with the slightest draft. This glow was perfectly constant. I moved to within 15 feet of the east wall. From that distance, the gap was clearly visible. The 4-inch horizontal crack with amber light filling it from inside. Brighter at the center, fading where the board met the stone frame. I stood there about 2 minutes, then went to the west face and let myself in. I did not use my flashlight. I stood at the entry and let my eyes adjust. A thin line of amber light was visible under the interior partition door, the glow from the back room leaking through the gap. Warm and steady. Same character as outside. I crossed the front room and opened the partition door. The back room was dark. The glow was gone. It did not dim, did not fade. It was simply gone. Instantly, at the moment the door handle moved, I stepped in and swept the room with my flashlight. Empty. East wall. Plywood board intact from the inside. 2 metal chairs. Concrete floor. I crossed to the east wall and pressed my palm flat against the plywood from the interior side. Cold. I looked through the gap from inside and could see the clearing. The pine rows in the distance. The night sky above the tree line. No external light source. The smell was immediate and strong. It was in the room as I stepped through the doorway. The same wet stone mineral character I had noted in September. But more concentrated this time. More present, as though the air in the room itself was saturated with it, rather than it simply rising from the floor or walls. I stood in that room and breathed through it for a moment. No decay smell, no chemical smell. It was the smell of very old sealed stone, and it was strong enough that I stopped and noted it in my phone before I did anything else. Then I looked at the chairs. I knew where they had been on my inspection 12 days earlier. Both chairs against the north wall, side by side near the east end. Now one chair was in the center of the back room. Not near the center. At the center, equidistant from all 4 walls, the seat level and square, as if placed deliberately. The silt on the concrete floor around the base of the chair showed a disturbance pattern I can best describe as a circular sweep outward. A ring of cleared concrete about 2 feet across directly beneath the chair, with the silt pushed back from that ring in a radial pattern. There were no drag marks in the silt, no scuff marks on the concrete, no boot prints other than my own from 12 days prior and the new ones I was making now. I photographed everything. Chair position, silt pattern, east wall interior, the gap from inside, all 4 angles of the floor around the chair. Using my boot as a unit, I measured the chair's position, within approximately 8 inches of equidistant from all 4 walls on both axes. I could not account for how it had gotten there. I locked the cabin and walked back to the truck. At the service road junction, I pulled the full October 31st image series. The 11:47 notification had triggered while I was still crossing the clearing. My shape was clear in the IR flash in the right side of the frame, about 40 feet from the camera, walking toward the east wall. On the left side of the frame, in the area of the board gap, there was a shape behind the plywood. The gap is a horizontal crack 4 inches long and 1.5 inches across at its widest. The resolution through a gap that narrow is limited, but behind the plywood, in the upper portion of the gap above the amber glow that filled the lower section, something was present. A mass. Something that was none of the structural elements of the cabin, no wall or floor or any surface I could account for. Something positioned close to the interior face of the east wall and occupying the vertical space of the room up to a height near the window frame top. That object had been in the back room while I was standing 15 feet outside on the other side of the plywood. The following morning, I showed the full image sequence to Denise Faber at the district office parking lot. Denise has worked this district for 6 years, holds a master's degree in wildlife biology from Murray State, and is not easily unsettled. She went through the images from June to October without comment, taking her time on each. When she reached the October 31st frame, she slowed down significantly. She went back and forth between it and the September image twice, then set my phone on the tailgate and looked at the tree line without speaking. She asked me how wide the interior of the back room was. I told her 14 feet. Picking up the phone, She measured the apparent width of the shape in the board gap against the known width of the board itself, holding her thumb and forefinger to the screen and cross-referencing to the 14-foot interior dimension. She set it on the tailgate again. "Rachel, that reads wider than the room," she said. I told her I knew. A long moment of quiet followed. Then she said, "You need an interior camera in that back room." She was right. That was the obvious next step, and I had been avoiding thinking about it. Getting approval for an interior camera inside a decommissioned structure required a formal equipment request and a resource monitoring justification. I drafted it that afternoon. The reasons I listed were suspected vandalism and structural condition monitoring. Both were defensible. Neither was the actual reason. It took 2 weeks to get approval for the additional equipment. During those 2 weeks, the cabin sat uninspected, both exterior cameras running, and I drove FR 847 on 3 separate nights and checked the Tacticam app each morning. November 8th, the glow appeared at 11:33 and was gone by 11:41. On the 14th, nothing. November 19th, the glow appeared at 11:27 and stayed until 11:52, the longest duration I had documented. I was running other sections of the district and did not reach the Barker Creek Junction in time to respond on any of those nights. The exterior cameras documented both appearances cleanly, consistent with every prior event in the image set. The glow in the board gap, warm and steady, no external source, gone before I could have driven out. On November 21st, I drove to the district office in Harrisburg and signed out a covert code black 20 from the equipment room on a 30-day resource monitoring request. The covert runs a 940 nanometer black flash IR array, invisible in complete darkness, with a 20 megapixel sensor and a 0.5 second trigger. I had used them on wildlife assignments before. I mounted the covert code black 20 on the interior west wall, 7 feet up, angled to cover the full width of the back room doorway from the front room side. Anything that crossed that doorway threshold from the back room into the front room, or from the front room into the back room, would appear in the covert's frame. I also noted something during the November 21st installation that I had not previously documented. While setting the camera mount, I crouched to check the angle and looked at the base of the west wall, where the concrete floor met the stone foundation. At the 2 corners of the west wall, at floor level, there were narrow gaps in the concrete where the pour had shrunk away from the stone over decades, normal for old construction. Through those gaps, very faint but present, I could smell the same wet stone mineral odor that I had been noting in the back room. It was not coming from the back room this time. It was coming from below the floor. Whatever was producing that smell was not in the cabin. It was under it. I put my nose close to the floor gap. The smell was unmistakable, rising from beneath the concrete slab. I made a note and finished mounting the camera. 3 weeks passed with nothing on the interior camera. Deer triggered the exterior cameras occasionally, and once a coyote at the clearing edge, but the interior covert did not fire. I was beginning to reconsider whether the camera placement was adequate when December 19th arrived. At 11:31 at night, the exterior cameras triggered. A notification image from the Tacticam showed the amber glow in the east window board gap, clear and consistent, same location, same color, same steady quality it always had. I was at home, 40 minutes by road from the service road junction. I pulled up the covert app on my phone. The interior camera had triggered at 11:33 at night. Its image showed the back room doorway from the front room side, framed by the interior partition wall, the concrete floor in the foreground, the back room visible beyond the doorway. Filling the entire doorway was warm amber light, neither a point source nor a beam. The whole doorway was lit from within the back room, a broad, even, amber illumination that I could not account for with any light source I could name. And at the right edge of the doorway, partly in the shadow where the partition wall met the doorway frame, there was something I had not expected, a section of a figure, vertical, present in the right edge of the doorway. The visible section ran from approximately mid-chest to hip level on something standing inside the back room near the east wall. Something tall enough that the visible section was all the doorway edge revealed of it at that angle. The surface, visible in the image, in the IR illuminated portion of the frame where the covert's black flash caught it against the ambient glow, was not smooth. It had texture, vertical in grain, running in parallel lines from the top of the visible section to the bottom, the way wood grain runs on the face of a plank. But this was not wood. The surface had depth to it, slight variance in the ridges, the look of something organic rather than manufactured. I sat in my kitchen at home and looked at that image for a long time. The amber glow in the back room doorway was not reflected or filtered light from any source I could identify. Its IR flash illuminated the right side of the doorway frame and the portion of the figure visible there. Separate from the IR illumination entirely, that amber glow had no external source. Two different light sources were present in that image. One I had introduced with the camera. The other was already there. I want to be precise about the December 19th image, because the specifics are exact, and they matter. The backroom interior is 14 feet east to west and 11 feet north to south, with a ceiling height of 6 feet and 2 inches. That interior partition doorway is approximately 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall. The covert code Black 20 was mounted on the interior west wall at 7 feet, slightly above the top of the doorway frame, angled downward at about 15 degrees to capture the full width of the doorway opening and several feet into the back room beyond it. In the December 19th image, the doorway was lit from within the back room by the amber glow. That glow filled the visible portion of the back room uniformly, which I want to be clear about, because a standard point source light positioned in the room would create a gradient, brighter near the source and dimmer further from it. What the camera documented was a broad, even amber illumination filling the room with no gradient, no bright center, no fall-off visible at the edges of what the camera could see through the doorway. The light appeared to be the room itself, rather than something in the room. At the right edge of the doorway frame, where the partition wall created a shadow line, there was a vertical element that was partially in the ambient glow and partially in shadow. The section visible in the frame ran from approximately the level of a mid-torso on a standing figure down to approximately the level of the hip on the same figure. That surface had the vertical grain texture I have described. It ran consistently from the top of the visible section to the bottom in parallel lines with slight variance in the ridges, and the overall impression was of something with a deeply textured outer surface, dense and specific, as though the grain had been formed under pressure over a very long time. The material was neither fabric nor skin as I know it. Bark was the closest visual comparison I could find, though even that fell short. Whatever I was looking at, the covert's 940 nanometer IR flash had illuminated it clearly, more clearly than the ambient amber glow had done. I called Denise the following morning and described the December image over the phone. She came to the district office at noon and I showed her on my phone. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she asked me if I had reported any of this through the formal incident reporting system. I told her I had not, because I did not know what category to report it under. She nodded. She said I should think about getting someone out to look at the cabin itself for potential hazard sources, meaning heat sources, chemical sources, anything that could account for the light without going into what the camera had caught. I knew she was right. A formal external inspection would either find something that explained the glow or confirm that there was nothing findable. Either outcome was useful. I submitted a request for a fire safety inspection through the district facilities office the following week. It was logged as a routine decommissioned structure inspection with a notation that staff had observed possible combustion indicators during standard monitoring. The district fire marshal scheduled a visit for December 27th. The fire marshal who came out was named Gary Petrie, based in the Murfreesboro area office of the Illinois Office of the State Fire Marshal. Petrie drove out in a state vehicle and spent about 90 minutes at the cabin. Working through both rooms with a combustion gas detector, he tested the walls and floor at multiple points with a surface thermometer, checked every corner for accelerant residue with a detection swab kit, and examined the electrical entry point on the north wall of the front room, which had been physically capped and sealed when the power was disconnected in 1987. The capped entry showed no active electrical conductance. Combustible gas was absent from the atmosphere of both rooms. No accelerant residue was found on any surface. No wax, no burn marks, no soot, no ash, no evidence of any ignition event anywhere in the structure. He was thorough and I did not show him the camera images until after he had finished. When he was done with the inspection, I showed him the October 31st exterior image and the December 19th interior image on my phone. He looked at the exterior image first, and his expression did not change. The interior image held his attention longer. He asked me how long the camera had been in place and whether the positioning could have created any artifact from its own IR flash, reflecting off a surface. I walked him through the camera placement and the angle. He looked at the interior image again. He said, "I'm going to put cause undetermined and source unidentified." He filed his report with the District Facilities Office under case reference SHN22VP041. He did not have any further comment on the images. The formal fire inspection finding of no identifiable source did not give me an explanation. It gave me documentation that the standard explanations had been formally evaluated and formally ruled out. That is a different thing, but it is something. In January, I began going through the available historical records for the Barker Creek site. I had access to the district filing system in Harrisburg, which held maintenance logs and inspection records going back to the mid-1960s. For anything before that, I needed to contact the regional archive. Shawnee National Forest falls under USDA Forest Service Region 9, administered from the regional office in Milwaukee. The regional archive maintains historical district records, construction logs, survey documentation, and administrative files going back to the establishment of the forest. I made an official records request to the Milwaukee Archive for any documentation related to Shelter 14C, Barker Creek, or the service road corridor in the Pope County section of the district. The archivist there was named Margaret Scholl, and she turned out to be a thorough professional who routinely went further than the specific request required. She sent me a scanned PDF of the 1,969 District Annual Report for the Southern Illinois District of the Shawnee National Forest. In the incident log section for November of that year, there was a single entry for Shelter 14C. The language in that entry was brief and procedural. A seasonal employee had reported an unauthorized occupant at Shelter 14C. The structure was investigated and found to be secure and unoccupied. A potential forced entry point at the east window was noted, and the window board was replaced and resecured. The investigating officer's name was not legible in the scan. The entry was 4 lines. No follow-up entry. The 1,972 annual report had a different incident listed for the Barker Creek shelter. In August of that year, a recreational user traveling on FR 847 had reported seeing a light emanating from the cabin after dark. The structure was inspected. No trespasser was found, no fire evidence, no vandalism. Light source, unidentified. The entry ended there. I read those 2 entries several times. The language was standard, procedural, stripped of anything that would read as unusual in an administrative log. But taken together with what I had been documenting for the past 8 months, they told me that the amber glow in that east window had been reported at least twice before I ever noticed it, by 2 different people in 2 different decades. And on both occasions, the investigation had found the cabin secure and the source unidentified. Margaret Scholl followed up with a second email 2 weeks later. She had found a 1,982 maintenance assessment file that included a series of documentary photographs of each decommissioned structure in the district, taken for condition assessment purposes. The photographs of the Barker Creek shelter exterior were standard documentation images: front elevation, rear elevation, both side elevations. In the east elevation photograph, taken at what appeared to be late afternoon or early evening based on the light quality in the surrounding timber, the plywood board on the east window was clearly in frame. The board was in place, all lag bolts visible, and at the upper right corner of the board, in the gap where the wood had pulled slightly away from the window frame, there was a faint, warm glow visible, present even in the ambient light conditions of the photograph's timing. That photograph was taken in 1982. The board gap was there in 1982, and the glow was visible through it in 1982, in a maintenance assessment photograph that no one had apparently looked at closely enough to question. I sat with that discovery for several days before I decided to try to locate former district personnel who might have direct knowledge of the Barker Creek site. Walt Eberhardt worked the Southern Illinois district of the Shawnee National Forest. from 1,966 through 1,994, retiring as district ranger. He was 77 years old when I found him through the Forest Service Retirees Association contact network in February. He lives in Vienna, which is Johnson County, about 40 miles west of the Pope County section. I drove out to meet him on a Tuesday morning. He was sharp, methodical, and generous with his time. He had a filing cabinet of personal records from his years on the district and a memory that was reliable on specifics. I brought printed copies of the 1,969 and 1,972 incident log entries and the 1,982 maintenance photograph. I laid them on his kitchen table. He picked up the photograph first. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at me and said, "I pulled that board gap myself one afternoon. Never did find out what made it." He told me that the light at the Barker Creek shelter was not new information to him. He had received 2 reports about it during his time on the district, one in 1977 and one in 1983. Both times he had driven out himself. Both times the cabin was secure and empty. Neither personal visit had been logged in the district records because, as Walt put it, there was nothing to log. Both times, he had found nothing. Writing an incident report about a light with no source and a smell he could not identify was not something he could have filed professionally. He mentioned his predecessor on the district, a ranger named Caleb Marsh, who had left the Southern Illinois district in 1971. Walt said Marsh had been on the district since 1959 and had been the investigating officer on at least one of the earlier Barker Creek reports. The specific content of those findings was unknown to Walt because Marsh had filed a report in late 1970 or early 1971 that had gone to the regional office directly rather than through the normal district filing process. That routing notation was visible in the district files when Walt took over in 1971. The report itself, Walt had never seen. A request for it around 1,975 had come back with the response that the file could not be located. He had not pressed further. I asked Walt if he had any sense of what Marsh's report had covered. Walt was quiet for a moment, then said that Marsh had left the district abruptly in the spring of 1971, and that no one who had been there at the time spoke clearly about the circumstances. Marsh had been, by all accounts, a thorough and steady professional for 12 years, and whatever had prompted his departure had not been a performance issue. Walt did not speculate further, and I did not push him on it. Walt mentioned that there was a local historical account he was aware of but did not have specific knowledge of, related to a ridge in the Pope County section of the forest that had been regarded as significant by the Shawnee people before their removal from southern Illinois in the 1830s. He said a historian in Golconda had spent years documenting Shawnee oral history accounts connected to specific geographic features in Pope County, and that she might have relevant material. He did not have the historian's name or contact information, but he knew she had published locally and that the Golconda Library had her work. Before I left, Walt asked me one question. He asked whether the light or whatever else I had documented had ever done anything threatening. I told him it had not. "Then pay attention to it, document it, and let it go about its business," he said. He walked me to my truck and went back inside. I drove back to Harrisburg and began making plans for what I was thinking of as a direct observation attempt. I had been documenting the light with cameras for 8 months. I had a fire inspection confirming no conventional source. I had historical documentation of the phenomenon going back to at least 1,969. The next step, from a law enforcement and resource protection standpoint, was to be in the structure when the event occurred and observe it directly. This was not a comfortable plan. It was, however, the logical one. I spent 2 weeks checking the exterior camera logs for any pattern that might help me predict a likely night. The events I had documented were clustered in the late evening hours, between roughly 11 and midnight. They appeared more frequently on clear nights than on overcast nights, though I had not documented enough events in overcast conditions to be certain that correlation was real rather than a coincidence in a small sample. The December event had been on a cold, clear night. The November events had both been on clear nights. I identified clear sky forecasts for the February calendar and marked the nights I was available to be in the area from around 10 in the evening. February 7th was a Monday, clear skies forecast, temperatures in the upper 20s. I reached the Barker Creek shelter at 10:45. I had told the duty supervisor I was doing a late resource monitoring check in the Pope County section, which was accurate. I had not told anyone else. I unlocked the cabin and entered the front room. I sat in the dark on the floor against the west wall, sleeping bag across my legs, sidearm on my right hip, radio on my left, phone in my vest pocket. Mid-20s at least inside the uninsulated stone. The cold in a structure like that has a specific quality, not the dry cold of an open field, but something denser, held in the stone and the concrete, rising from the floor through the sleeping bag. Mildew and old wood, normal, nothing, coming from under the back room door. I sat there without anything happening for over an hour. I pulled the Tacticam app at 11:15 and saw nothing. At 11:32, I pulled it again. The east window camera had triggered 2 minutes earlier at 11:30, and the notification image showed the glow in the board gap, amber and steady, present. I could not see light under the partition door yet. I waited. At 11:34, the glow appeared at the base of the partition door, a thin line of amber spreading across the bottom gap between the door and the concrete floor. It was present and warm and perfectly still. No flicker. I sat against the west wall and looked at that line of light under the door for what I estimate was 6 to 8 minutes. The smell began to change in the front room while I sat there, the mildew receding and the wet stone mineral smell rising through the door gap with the light. Not strong, but clearly present, rising steadily. At 11:42, I stood up. I crossed the front room. I put my right hand on the partition door handle. The line of amber light at the door base went out the instant my hand closed on the metal of the handle. Not a dimming, not a pulling away, gone at contact. I stood at the closed door for a moment with my hand on the handle, and the front room was dark and the smell had receded and there was nothing. I opened the door. The back room was dark. I swept it with my flashlight. Empty. East wall. Board intact. The 2 metal chairs. I went to the east wall and pressed my palm against the plywood from inside. Cold. The mineral smell was still present in the back room, more so than in the front room, but at a lower intensity than before. I checked every corner. I checked the floor for any new prints in the silt. Nothing new. I stood in the middle of the back room for several minutes and breathed and tried to think clearly. Then I remembered the interior camera. I went back to the truck and pulled the covert code Black 20 app. The interior camera had triggered at 11:33, 1 minute after the exterior cameras had first caught the glow in the east window. Its image showed the back room doorway from the front room side, the partition wall framing the opening, the concrete floor in the foreground. Beyond the doorway, the back room was lit with the amber glow, the same broad, even illumination I had documented in December. And in the back room, visible through the doorway, standing against the east wall with its back to the camera, there was a figure. It was standing at the east wall. Its back was toward the doorway, toward me, toward the camera, arms at its sides. That ceiling stands at 6 feet and 2 inches. Whatever I was looking at had its head within approximately 3 to 4 inches of it. Running from the floor to within inches of the ceiling, the body spanned a vertical distance consistent with a figure between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet tall. Proportions were not standard. A long torso relative to the leg length, arms that hung below the level of the hips, proportionally longer than any human arm relative to the torso length I know. That head was disproportionately broad at the base, narrowing toward the crown, giving the skull an outline unlike anything I know from human anatomy or any wildlife anatomy I have been trained to recognize. The surface visible on the back and shoulders in the IR illumination had the same vertical grain texture I had documented in December. It ran continuously from the visible base of the figure up through the shoulders and partway up the back of the head. That texture appeared dense and layered, like something that had accumulated or grown in parallel over a very long time. Amber glow was strongest at the top of the figure, between the crown of the head and the ceiling, filling that narrow gap with a warm, concentrated light that was not reflected from any surface but simply present. It was facing the east wall. It was turned away from both the doorway and the camera. It was standing at the east wall and facing it. And it was there in that room with me on the other side of the door for at least 6 minutes before I put my hand on the handle, and it was gone before I entered. I have replayed that sequence many times in the month since February. I was in the front room. The figure was in the back room. There is no connecting passage, no window, no second door. The back room has one doorway, which connects to the front room, and one window, which is boarded from outside with lag-bolted plywood. Whatever was in that back room at 11:33 left that room between the moment I touched the door handle and the moment I opened the door, and there is no physical means by which it could have done so in the conventional sense. I have not filed a formal wildlife incident report on any of this. There is no wildlife classification category that fits what I photographed. I have not filed a trespassing report because what I have documented does not fit the legal definition of trespassing in any way I know how to apply. I have not filed a paranormal incident report because the Forest Service does not have one. I have 28 documented events in 14 months of monitoring. All 28 show the glow on at least one exterior camera. 7 of them show a partial or complete figure in at least one camera image. The February 7th interior image is the clearest and most complete documentation I have. 3 people have seen the full image archive. Denise Faber, who reviewed the material as it developed from October onward. Walt Eberhardt, who I drove to Vienna in March with a printed copy of the February image. Walt looked at it for a long time and then set it on the table and said, "That would be it then." He did not elaborate, and I did not ask him to. And Margaret Scholl at the Milwaukee Regional Archive, who found the historical documentation. I sent her the February image in April and asked about the Caleb Marsh report from 1971. Margaret Scholl confirmed what Walt had told me, that no record of that report exists in the regional archive. A secondary search through physical files turned up nothing. Her response noted that some files from the late 1960s and early 1970s were lost in a storage facility incident in 1979. The Marsh report, if it was ever filed, is not retrievable. During a cabin inspection in March, I noticed something I had not documented previously. While I was in the front room, I crouched to check the condition of the west wall foundation at floor level, where the concrete had shrunk away from the stone in 2 narrow gaps at the corners. I had noted the mineral smell rising from those gaps in November. This time I brought a tape measure. I measured the gaps. I also looked carefully at the stone courses at the base of the west wall, immediately above the concrete floor. The lowest course of stone on the west wall was different from the rest of the wall. It was a different rock type, visibly denser, with a different color, not the warm buff tan of the local sandstone. A grayer, cooler-toned stone with a crystalline surface quality at the fracture edges. I brought a small fragment of that lowest course stone home with me, worked loose from the interior where the concrete had already cracked away from it. I sent it to the Illinois State Geological Survey at the University of Illinois in Champaign for identification. 6 weeks later, the response arrived. That fragment was identified as dolomitic limestone, specifically a dolostone consistent with rock units from the Silurian period. Predominant surface geology in the Pope County section of Shawnee National Forest is Pennsylvanian-aged sandstone and shale, with some Mississippian carbonate units in certain exposures. Silurian dolomite does not occur at the surface in Pope County. The nearest natural Silurian dolomite outcroppings are in the northern section of the state, in the Illinois Basin margin areas, well north of the Shawnee uplands. Someone transported stone from a distant formation to that building site before the CCC arrived. I went back to the 1938 construction log in the Milwaukee archive and looked at it more carefully than I had on my first review. In the materials notes section, which I had skimmed previously because I was looking for structural information, there was a brief notation from the crew foreman, dated the 14th of June, 1938. It read as follows, and I am quoting directly from the document because the exact language matters. He wrote that 4 pre-existing stone markers had been found at the corners of the survey stake locations for the cabin footprint. He noted that the markers appeared to be intentionally placed, were flush with the ground surface, and were incorporated into the foundation course for efficiency. He listed no origin or material analysis. He did not indicate that anyone questioned where the markers had come from or why they were there. The construction log moved on from that notation without any further mention of the markers. The cabin was built where those markers were. Whoever placed the markers had selected that specific location and marked it before the CCC ever arrived, possibly long before. The markers are Silurian dolomite, a rock type that does not naturally occur within many miles of that site. They were placed there deliberately by someone who sourced stone specifically for the purpose. I submitted a research inquiry to the Golconda branch of the Pope County Public Library. The librarian, Agnes Tilley, who has worked there for over 30 years, confirmed that Doris Keck, a local historian who died in 2019, had indeed written a series of locally published monographs on Shawnee oral history specific to the Pope County geography. Keck sourced her accounts through direct interviews with Shawnee community members over more than 30 years. One of the monographs deals specifically with what she translates as threshold places, locations in the Pope County landscape that Shawnee oral tradition identified as points of ongoing contact between the visible world and something older. Agnes located both monographs in the local history collection and copied the relevant sections. I am still going through them carefully. I have not requested a transfer from this district. I have thought about it. Every law enforcement officer has the right to request a transfer for any number of professional or personal reasons, and my record supports a placement at any district I might want. I have not done it. Part of that is simple. This is my district. I have been on it for 8 years, and I know it at a level that took years to build, and I do not want to leave it. Part of it is something harder to explain clearly. I am a law enforcement officer. Part of what that means is that when something is happening in your jurisdiction and you cannot explain it, you do not leave it unmonitored. You document it. You investigate it. Evidence gets gathered. A record gets built. And you do not stop doing those things because what you are documenting falls outside your training. I have 28 events documented. The Barker Creek shelter remains on my twice-monthly inspection rotation. Both exterior cameras are still running. My interior covert code black is still mounted on the west wall of the front room. That chair in the back room continues to be found in positions that do not match how I left it. As of my last inspection 2 weeks ago, it was against the south wall, a position I have not seen it occupy before. The other chair remains against the north wall, where I have always kept it. I repositioned the moved chair back against the north wall and photographed the floor and all 4 walls before I left. I do not know where it will be when I go back on Tuesday. The glow has appeared 17 times since February, always in the same time window, always through the same gap in the east window board. Denise has been present for 2 of those events, standing with me at the clearing edge. She watched the light in that board gap both times and said nothing to me while we stood there, and nothing substantive afterward. She knows what the February image shows. We have both been in this work long enough to know that some things in a forest do not fit what the training covers, and that the honest response to that situation is to stay present, keep documenting, and resist the impulse to make the evidence into something it is not. The Shawnee people called this part of Illinois home for generations before removal in the 1830s. This land has a long history before the CCC arrived in the 1930s, and a long history before the Forest Service arrived in 1933, and a very long history before any of that. The forest roads and the survey stakes in the district inventory system are layered on top of something older than any of it. What was at that building site before those dolomite markers were placed, I cannot say. Who placed them and what they understood the site to be remains unknown. As for the figure in the February image, where it goes when the light extinguishes, and what it is doing when it stands at the east wall facing the stone, I have no answer to any of those questions. I know that it has been there at least since 1969, when a seasonal employee reported it and was told the cabin was empty. I know that it was there in 1977, when Walt Eberhart drove out in the dark and found nothing. I know that it was there in 1982 when a maintenance photographer documented a glow through the board gap without apparently noticing or commenting on it. I know that Caleb Marsh wrote a report about something at that site in 1970 or 1971, and that the report does not exist in any archive that has been searched, and that Marsh left his position in the spring of 1971 without a clear explanation. I know that when I sit in the front room of that cabin in the dark, on a clear winter night with the temperature below 30 and the creek audible to the south, and I see the amber line appear under the partition door and I smell the stone come through with it. What I feel is not quite fear. It is something more like the feeling of being in the presence of a very long continuity that has nothing to do with me and has not been interrupted by my presence and will not be interrupted by my leaving. Whatever is in that back room has been there for a long time. It knows the cabin is there because the cabin was built where it already was. It has tolerated the Forest Service's presence the way very old things tolerate the presence of everything newer than themselves, with patience and without particular interest. My next inspection is Tuesday. I will drive the service road in the dark and park at the cabin clearing and check the cutaback image history and the Tacticam feed and the covert interior log. I will open the padlock and enter the front room and note the current condition of both rooms and the position of the chairs and the quality of the air and anything else that has changed since my last visit. I will photograph everything that needs to be photographed, and I will enter it in the maintenance log, and I will lock the cabin when I leave. I have been doing this for 8 years. I expect to be doing it for a long time more.